Morning, everybody. That's always a surprise when it suddenly hits you at the end, isn't it? Happy Hump Day. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's Whitehall correspondent, Mikey Smith. Morning, Mikey.
Hello. How you doing?
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. And remember, the best ones are in with a chance of getting the blankety-blank checkbook and pen of its day, the News Agenda mug. Mikey's got one. You need one. So what have we got? Well, the Mirror has splashed. Thanks, Mikey. Good advertising. Nice brand placement. When the Mirror has splashed on some Ring doorbell footage of a doorstep row involving the mum who was brutally stabbed to death on her own doorstep in Somerset, along with her husband while their two children slept upstairs. We can't discuss that for legal reasons, but the inevitable court case will probably make the front pages too, so watch this space. Inside, though, Mikey got a story, everybody. He got one in the paper. Woohoo! I'd send you a mug, Mikey, but you've already got one.
I've already got one, thank you.
Now, this is about the lavish, no expense spared Tory fundraising dinner that they hold every year. But it's usually in February, Mikey. So why do they bring it forward? Why the big news?
So this event is a matter of some fascination to me. I've been fascinated by it for about 5 years now.
It's your obsession, isn't
it? There have been years where I turn up and stand outside it until 1 a.m. to try and talk to people afterwards. Didn't happen this year because they slightly wrong-footed everyone by holding it about 2 months earlier than they usually do. They usually have it in sort of end of January, early February. And the suggestion that's been made to me is the reason they're having it so early this year is because, I'm not going to say they've run out of money, but the war chest is a little lower than it usually is at this time of year. So in their annual report that came out in August, the Conservative Party said that their income had been severely affected by COVID because it meant they had to cancel all but one of the fundraising events for about a space of 18 months. So if you look at the amount of money they raised in 2019, it was about 55 million quid in donations. If you look at the equivalent in 2020, which obviously not an election year, so it was going to be lower, but it was about 17 million quid. So that was quite a slump in the space of a year because they weren't allowed to put on events like what used to be called the Black and White Ball, now called the Winter Party. They have a summer party. Sometimes they have a spring party as well. But what happens at these events is they invite the donors round for a slap up. And after dinner, they do an auction where they effectively sell access to senior ministers. of course, they wrap it up in sort of jokiness, like this time you could bid on an hour playing cricket with Rishi Sunak, which sold for 35,000 quid. But that's
The issue
is
who that's sold to, and whether the person who bought an hour of Rishi's time on a cricket pitch, better for Britain. My invite got lost as well. I don't know why they didn't invite me and Mikey. Obviously, Mikey's there most.
Same. Yeah.
They probably put it forward just to avoid you, Mikey. It's the fact that whether the person who made that bid to see the foreign secretary or the levelling up minister or the chancellor is when they're there having a word in their shell like for some kind of favour or lobbying that comes out later on, isn't it? That's the
well, this is the thing. You pay £22,000 to do karaoke with Liz Truss. Nobody knows if you're actually doing karaoke during that time. There's no sort of checks and balances on what's actually going on when you have that time with the senior minister. And it's a string of senior ministers offering up access to themselves to the highest bidder. And this happens twice, 3 times a year.
They're not particularly celebrity, are they? They're not the kind of people you would choose to spend some time on the karaoke machine with normally.
No. So it's hardly Harry Styles, no.
No, the only reason that they're bidding for it is because Liz Truss also happens to be the foreign secretary and is involved in trade deals, or that Rishi happens to be the Chancellor of the Exchequer and is involved in setting tax rates and stuff like this. There's a clear quid pro quo for doing it.
It's a very odd situation. This year, one thing we found out was that Boris Johnson sat at a table with the Reuben brothers, who many Mirror readers will know as the new part owners of Newcastle United. Another thing that came out that was interesting yesterday was that the HMRC had announced yesterday afternoon, so the day after the black and white ball. I'm not saying anything was connected at all, but they announced the day after the party that they were moving 9,000 staff to an office complex in Newcastle, which is being developed by the Reuben brothers. The Reuben brothers are the second richest family in the UK, according to the last Sunday Times Rich List, and they have over the years given, as a family, about £800,000 to the party. So they are big donors.
If my family was had that much money, but if it was giving that much money to someone, you would expect something in return for your family, wouldn't you, really? As opposed to just doing it for the goodness of your heart, to have some money. I don't care what you do with it. It's up to you. Now, at the same time, overnight, we've heard reports that the 1922 committee, which is the committee of backbench MPs that actually involves some of the machinery of how a parliamentary party works, have received some letters of no confidence in Boris Johnson, which is kind of eyebrow raising when he's got such a massive majority and he's got Brexit done, we're told. So is he trying to raise funds for a sudden snap election? He's an opportunist. If things are starting to go against him, he's had some very difficult weeks recently. There's been lots of talk about a possible snap election next year. Is this why he's trying to build up the Tory war chest now?
Possibly. If I had to put money on it, I would say that that's not what last night was about, because their deficit is so ridiculous this year. They've already had to lay off a bunch of staff at CCHQ. They've reduced their headcount significantly. I think last night was more about sort of getting themselves on an even keel. Whether they're already talking to donors about sort of building up a war chest for a snap election, I wouldn't put it past them. I think they would struggle to afford that in the next couple of months, because they've got a couple of by-elections coming up as well, which are notoriously expensive campaigns, especially if you want to hold on to them. As far as the letters going into the 1922 committee are concerned, that is bringing back wonderful memories of the days of Theresa May. You'll recall that we had a running tally going in. I can't remember what the trigger point is, I'm going to have to
Graham
look
Stringer
all this
gets it.
up.
It's a certain percentage, isn't it, of the
Yeah,
number
it's
of MPs, I think, so
so
it's different every time.
it's different this time.
I
But yeah,
remember
no.
Graham saying, "I've got 6, I've got 3, I've got another 2." Totting it
but
all up.
but
Now,
but he keeps them. They're cumulative. So he's just got a little box, I guess, that he waits for them to build up. He doesn't send them back if the threshold isn't met. So if they've started going in, that's a worrying precedent to set, because certainly what happened with Theresa May was once a few went in, then it sort of opened the floodgates. And once people know that, once MPs know that other people have done the same, then they've got a bit of cover about it.
Weakness appears. Now, as Mike says, morning, Mike. We know numbers and names of letters of no confidence in the PM are notoriously secret. I wonder if Theresa May's written one yet. But do the reports of them coming into the 22 show that cracks are showing in Johnson's number 10 empire? We've had a lot of votes where he's still got them through, but his majority has been severely reduced, Mikey. And the last big one, so many people abstained that his majority was reduced down to 20 odd. There's every possibility that at some point he'll have a vote on Peppa Pig World or something, and they'll have a proper rebellion about something, isn't there?
I've never been to Peppa Pig World. I've always wanted to. But yeah, it's not all rosy. There are. I think Boris's problem currently is that he keeps disagreeing with. There's a lot of people angry with him for different reasons. There are still people angry with him about the Owen Paterson thing, where he trooped them all through the lobbies, only to troop them back out again the following day. The Treasury are annoyed with him because he keeps announcing things at inopportune moments that they think are, ruining all of their good announcements. The Treasury think the trains announcement, the rail announcement, was a really good thing that was spoilt by timing. Number 10 this morning, quotes from Number 10 saying a date on a calendar wasn't going to make a difference to that one, and they're probably right. But there are various
at the same time as it needed to end Boris Johnson's sleaze swamp.
Well, yeah, that I suppose was helpful, yeah. But there are various parts of the party who are annoyed with Boris Johnson for different reasons, which is always problematic, because it means that if you sort of start trying to appease one side of the party, you don't necessarily appease the other side of the party. That was Theresa May's problem. But that's sort of where we are. As far as the secrecy around the letters is concerned, whether that signifies something breaking down. There's always two sides to a letter going in, so don't be surprised that us in the media find out that some letters have gone in, because the sender could always receive it. Graham Brady, the head of the 1922 committee, jealously protects the secrecy of the number and names on the letters that are going in, but there's nothing stopping the people sending the letters telling everyone about it. So we can get a rough tally from who's saying things.
We'll see. There'll be fairly obvious awkward squad members that go. No, I think it's probably him. Now, Michelle says, "Morning, Michelle. At what point will this lot get caught out? Christmas fundraiser, is this above board?" Mikey, and the Labour Party has donations from the unions.
That's true.
And the Tory argument would be that we've got to go and seek something from individuals, because that's the only way we get our cash. So we have to have fundraisers and events, and it's perfectly legitimate and very much above board. Is it?
I mean, it's legal. It's certainly legal. The age-old argument is whether you think it's the same that unions, which are made up of sort of fee-paying, dues-paying workers, are exactly the same as one very, very rich billionaire who gives gobs of cash to the opposite party. There was I think there was a figure recently. I think it was about 25% of donations to the Conservative Party are from 10 people, which is very different to, say, a union passing on member dues to the Labour Party, which is from hundreds of thousands or more. So yeah, I mean, the other argument would be that parties should be funded from taxpayers' money, which I don't think anyone really wants to go down that road. Some
Any
people do.
taxpayer wants that to happen.
No.
So no, we shall see. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the Tory fundraiser? What do you think about selling access to ministers? How much would you pay to have dinner with Michael Gove? It's 25 grand, apparently, they gained the other night, and probably another 25 grand to go on to a club with him afterwards, or maybe not to go on a club with him afterwards. They'd probably have raised more if they'd offered the clubbing experience, I'd have thought, especially if something else came with it. So we are going to move on to some other stuff. But first, Rob says, is the ERG, this is the backbench group of MPs who are the European Research Group, the awkward squad, the ones who caused Theresa May so much trouble, are the ERG concerned about Nigel Farage musing about the possibility of a new party? He's done that a couple of times before. It's not worked yet, Rob. And are they thinking about a snap election to seize the initiative? They've got some problems with Farage just historically. Is he going to come back? Is that enough to cause Boris enough concern that he'd have a snap election on that basis?
Nigel Farage is I mean, you can never put it past him. He came out the other day, apparently unprompted by anyone, and said that he'd been approached by several donors about making a return to politics. If I had to put money on it, I'd say he'd come back to what is now the Reform Party, used to be the Brexit Party. If he was going to do that, I think he would stand for them. But I don't know. He's making quite a lot of money on Cameo now. Have you seen this?
Sending stupid messages to people who use fake names, and he doesn't seem to takes the 50 quid.
He's making quite a lot of money on Cameo. He's got his GB News gig. I'm not sure he would. I mean, I'm not sure he'd give that up at all. But I'm not sure he'd. I don't think it's not a very cozy life being an MP.
Oh no, it's hard work. He's never been an MP, and he's only been an MEP because that was easy.
Well, exactly. I don't think he's ever actually wanted to do it, but well, he might have in the early days, but these days I'm not sure he actually wants to do it, because you can't make a lot of money unless you skirt the rules a little bit, and it cuts down on your media time, and that's where he
he's
where he gets all of his.
Fundamentally, he's quite a vain man. Doesn't like me at all. Refused to shake my hand. And so if he's getting the attention for free because of a party, Rob, this new party set up, then he's quite happy. But if he's getting the attention and getting paid for it on GB News, depending how much attention you get on that channel, which probably slightly fewer viewers than we get on this, then maybe he's probably not gonna want to switch that out. Let's see, shall we? Mike says, if Keir Starmer doesn't begin PMQs today by shuffling his papers and muttering "forgive me" for 20 seconds, there's no justice in this world. Mike Holden, you've done it at last. You get a mug. That's it. You win. I know you've been trying for weeks and weeks. I've been dragging it out, and I've been trying to make you wait and work harder for your mug. But that's it. You've done it now. There you go.
Congratulations, Mike.
Yes, congratulations. You've managed it at last. That would be good, wouldn't it? If he just started talking about Peppa Pig. I'm not sure Keir Starmer's got the sense of humour to do it. It would be quite good if he just stood there and this makes me look incompetent, doesn't it, Prime Minister? How do you think it made you look? Anyway, we do have some other questions. So what happened after this Tory fundraiser is even more interesting, dear viewer. So after all this happened, they raised all this money for 10,000 here and 20,000 there and 30,000 to play cricket with Rishi Sunak and have a word in his ear about your personal business rates or whatever. They all left early to head back to Parliament to take part in the vote on the social care bill. Some of them, of course, abstained. Quite a lot of them did. Which features in more detail on page 16. Now, Mikey, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is, as far as I understand it, a system for social care under which those who are poorer pay a greater share of their fairly meagre assets towards their care in their old age, particularly if they get dementia and need residential help. But poverty air pollution, menial work, leaving school early, shift work, they're all things known to increase your chances of getting dementia. So if you're poor, you're more likely to get dementia. And if you're poor, you are going to lose more of what little you have to pay for the privilege of having dementia. So it's just a tax on poverty, isn't it? As far as I can see.
If effectively that's right, it's a really complicated thing. I had to sort of bury my head in it over the weekend to write about it. But the head and tail of it is that the way this was set out when it was first announced was that no one will have to sell their home to pay for their social care later in life, and there was a cap put on the amount you'd have to pay, and there was sort of a system put in place where anyone who had less than £100,000 in assets would get some means tested help to pay for it. The problem is they haven't sort of tied the two together. Well, they've deliberately not tied the two together. So the means tested help you get if you have less than £100,000 doesn't count towards the cap. So the upshot of this is that people who have lots and lots in assets don't get the means tested help, but also they pay off the cap. They get up to the cap much more quickly than someone who has much less in assets, and by assets I mean property, houses.
Yeah.
So it's not a good look. The people who sort of designed the system recommended the cap be brought in, recommended that exactly the opposite of this should happen, and they're doing it to save a few billion quid. Which, when you consider that social care was always the big band-aid that someone had to rip off, it was always going to be expensive. It should be expensive, but they're sort of nickel and diming it a little bit, to use a terrible American expression.
But this is equivalent to asking people who are on the minimum wage to pay a higher rate of national insurance than people on 100 grand a year to fund the NHS. You are funding a universal kind of healthcare that you can all get access to, and you're asking poor people to pay more as a proportion of their earnings than rich people. It's so regressive, it hurts.
Exactly.
And I can't.
It's about what you're left with at the end of it.
Sorry?
It's about what you're left with at the end of it.
Yeah. You're left with very little.
Yeah. But yes, that's the situation. It's going through to the House of Lords, who are probably going to have a field day with it. The people in the House of Lords, I mean, possibly not surprisingly, given that they tend to be slightly older age than people in the House of Commons, are unimpressed with this solution. Not that it will really apply to many people in the House of Lords.
No, well, exactly. They're going to have some other issues, aren't they? But keep asking us your questions. What do you think about the Tories' massive fundraising bash and then going off to vote for this thing? What do you think about the social care funding system? How can we sort it out? Mike says, those who Mrs. Thatcher encouraged to buy their council houses in the 1980s will now be selling them to mostly private landlords to pay for their care. There's going to be a lot of people in the desolate north, as the Tories call it, which will be doing equity release, will be selling their homes while they're still living in it and selling them off to private landlords who then rent them out at an extortionate rate. And what's really interesting, Mikey, is that a lot of the cabinet are from parts of the world where this does matter. Sajid Javid there, the health secretary we just saw a picture of, represents Bromsgrove, which is not the richest part of the world. And people in his constituency have some pretty low price housing in it. Rishi Sunak's Richmond, North Yorkshire, which is fairly posh for North Yorkshire, but it's still not Richmond, West London. No. And Carol says there, where is it proportional to someone's assets? Why can't it be proportional to their earnings, Mikey? Why doesn't it make some sense?
All good questions. All good questions. I think the issue with assets rather than earnings is that possibly by the time people end up needing to use it, they don't have a lot of earnings. and it's problematic to take away people's earnings when their earnings are fairly
non-existent
low.
at that
Yeah,
point.
exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Pension,
The maths just
know,
wouldn't work.
it is an asset. If you have in your 70s or something, you have a house. If you're lucky enough to have a house, then that is an asset, and it's something that if it was sort of redistributed somehow in that wealth, then it can be beneficial to the nation as a whole. But if you've only got $100,000 house, then you should only have to lose 40% of it, and someone who's got a $500,000 house only lose 40% of it. Whatever it is that we decide is the reasonable amount for people to contribute, everyone earns that percentage.
Yeah,
Contributes.
there was some analysis over the weekend. You may have read in Her Majesty's Sunday Mirror, which was that about about a third of houses in the north. Sorry, a third of constituencies in the north would be affected by this, and there would be zero in London, and the south east, I believe, would on average be affected by the change, just because of the difference in average house prices between the two.
Yeah,
so
it's just not going to affect the traditional Tory heartlands, but the red wall, Tory red wall, blue wall, whatever you want to call it these days, is very much going to be affected. So that's where some of the discontent with Boris Johnson's coming from. Now, Simon says, and I don't think this is a tall, balmy thing to be asking. Simon says, will they be bringing back the workhouses and so deplete the population? We seem to be going back to Victorian values. Now, the workhouses, Mikey, and for viewers, any of you unaware of it, were introduced as a way of getting people off the streets. There were people who went village to village because they were homeless and poor, and they caused social trouble in Victorian England. And so they built these workhouses as a way of reforming the poor. And what they did was they penalised, punished, mistreated, tortured, starved, and abused the poor by putting a roof over their heads, unfortunately. But they were horrible, horrible places. They were places of great shame to have to go to. And the Victorians felt like they were doing a good thing by making it more difficult to be poor, right? The attitude, the reason behind some of these workhouses was to make it uncomfortable to be homeless or to go from parish to parish, to penalise you for acting like a poor person, really. By making the Victorians feel better, because they're at least giving you some watered down, what they called skilly, which was basically a few vegetables and some water and a bit of oats. And if you did badly in the workhouse, they would give you watered down skilly. It was even worse. So has Simon got a point, Mikey? Is this the Tories punishing people for being poor? Look, it's your fault. You should have pulled yourself up by your bootstraps. I don't care if you had an industrial accident. I don't care if you had an illness or a disability. I just think you should have found a way to make yourself richer, like we all did. Is that part of it?
I mean, excuse me. I wouldn't go so far as to say that was sort of the intention. I think that's part of the
mindset.
It's certainly part of the mindset of people who end up representing that. Some MPs who end up representing that party, that is part of the mindset. I don't know if that ends up in being discussed in policy, but that's certainly part of the makeup of the of the party itself. Is there's a certain amount of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And,
I know some backbench Tory MPs that I've met over the years who are from fairly poor beginnings and who have a lot of sympathy with this and will not like any of this stuff at all. And I know some others who, like you say, have pulled themselves up by their bootstraps and don't really see anyone else that shouldn't be doing it. And when you have discussions with them, they just think everybody is healthy and upright, and what's the problem? And they don't really understand that not everyone goes to university and not everyone doesn't have caring responsibilities at home, for example, as children with their own parents, or disabilities, which makes it more difficult. Now, Carol says, why wasn't the social care cap proportional to people's assets? Why didn't they make it proportional? Why is it this flat figure, Mikey? Is that stupidity or...
It is slightly proportional. There is a proportional aspect of it, but there are a number of hard caps in it. This is where it gets a little bit complicated. So the help you get up to I mentioned before, there's the £1,000, sorry, £100,000 of assets below which you get some means tested help. Keep it in there as means tested. So people who have 0 assets will get more help than people who have £99,000 worth of assets. So there is a proportional aspect to it, but it's just that it doesn't taper as well as it possibly could. And also the key thing that the architects of this policy, when it was being advised to the government, said that they should do is include the means tested assistance in the cap. So if you had, 50 grand's worth of sort of government benefit assistance with your social care, that should count towards the total cap that you have. So that would make it sort of fairer across the board. Problem with that is, and the reason they didn't do that is it costs money. It's an expensive, more expensive way to do it, a few billion quid. But that's the reason behind it, as far as I'm aware.
You're going to do it properly. You'll do it properly, and you really got to have a national care service. Now, before we move on to some other questions, some other bit of good news. Pamela says, people buy their homes to leave an inheritance to their children and families. So the poor lost everything while the rich keep their riches. This is the point, isn't it? Because the rich, you're denying someone the chance to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, to save and to work hard, to get themselves a small house, to have some equity in it, to leave that to their children, who can then get a bit of onto the first rung a bit easier. They're actually denying the chance for others to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Now, it's going to go for an amendment. It's going to go through the House of Lords, and there's going to be amendments. But very quickly, Mikey, some of the people who are leading those amendments include former Health Minister Andrew Lansley, who's not the sharpest tool in the box, generally responsible for £24 billion of cock up in the NHS. What are the chances of the House of Lords actually putting some of this stuff back in? And
I think they'll have a go. I don't know. I mean, it may end up in what we call parliamentary ping pong, which is when, because obviously for a bill to become a law, it has to go through the House of Commons, then it has to go through the House of Lords, who can amend it and send it back to the Commons. It eventually has to end up with essentially both sides agreeing and the Commons voting it through on the final hurdle. But it can go back several times. It doesn't have to just be once or twice. It can go back and forth between the Commons and the Lords several times. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. I think the government might have factored that in a little bit, because this isn't due to come in and take effect until, I think it's September next year. Sorry, 2023. Tell a lie. The year after.
Have an election between now and then, so we won't have to throw it out. Who cares?
Could well happen, but I mean, not unlikely. I mean, I think we have to have an election by, I want to say May 2023.
It's 2024, I think, but
2024.
But they're there's all this stuff has been talking about early elections. But I don't think Boris Johnson's going to drag it out. He's not one to wait for his election, is he? Now, we do have some other good news to talk about. Keep asking us your questions. We'll have a roundup at the end. What do you think about the Tory fundraising bash? What do you think about them leaving early to go and vote for this tax on poverty? Fundamentally, can we all start calling it the poverty tax? Because then I can claim ownership of it. And also it's quite accurate, as Mikey's just confirmed. But first off, there is some good news in the world. And here it is. Now, if you were able to find every human that's ever existed in history and explain to them what a vaccine is, they would probably say that vaccines are fantastic and marvelous things. There's a few people currently alive and on various social media sites, including this one, who think otherwise, but they're idiots. And aside from tackling COVID, it seems like there are other benefits to the Oxford AstraZeneca jab as well. So yesterday, Prince Charles opened a new £1 billion science hub in Cambridge for AstraZeneca, which is powered by geothermal energy. In Cambridge, Mikey, we're powered by volcanoes. Brilliant. And B, it's going to grow human cells in labs to test medicines on, so that we can end the practice of testing them on animals, because we still test lots of things on animals, because mice actually have a very similar metabolism to us, I was told yesterday. Now, Mikey, is this proof that vaccines don't just save lives, but actually can correct our moral compass too?
Thank you for that one. Yes, definitely, 100%. That is exactly what this proves.
Yes.
There you go.
There you go. He's agreed with me.
This is unarguably good news.
Yes, it's fantastic that any building in the UK is powered by geothermal energy. I love that alone. But if they're doing things that aren't going to be tested on animals or finding ways to avoid doing that, then I think we can generally say that AstraZeneca are pretty top people.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
I did enjoy in the piece the phrase "heart in a jar" being used for the sort of the created heart tissue that they're going to test things on. It made me think of. Do you remember Futurama?
Yes.
Where all the old presidents had their heads in jars. Yeah,
Yes.
made me think of that, but in a good
Yeah.
way.
Maybe that's
Warm,
the use of
fuzzy
Donald
way.
Trump. Because instead of animal testing, you just that's it. Just after you've gone, you don't need it anymore. Stick it in a jar and they'll test medicines on it for other
Yeah,
people.
why not? Why
Hooray!
not?
I'd be up for that. That'd be quite cool. Right. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Well done, Mike, on your mug. Thank you for joining me, Mikey. Let's wait for PMQs at 12 o'clock and let's hope that Keir Starmer does indeed shuffle his papers and say, forgive me, over and over and over and over again, while sitting there in silence. The entire House of Parliament holds its sides with laughter. Thank you for joining, everybody, and we'll see you again next Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Bye-bye.